As a creative aspect, TV is one of the best things that we do as a species. Along with music and film and books, they bring out the best creative of all of us. They entertain and they bring so much joy to many. They invoke emotion and enable us to feel things that we bury sometimes deep down. That's what this podcast is for. Welcome to A Million Little TV Shows. This is what I call the breakdown while I break down. Each week I will go through a different TV show, a different season of that TV show, and different episodes of that show. And I will break down not only emotions, but I will break down stories from my life, and let you know why these TV shows mean so much to me, and why I believe that they are some of the most important shows out there. This podcast is here to highlight a lot of smaller TV shows, or TV shows that don't really get a platform, because we know of a bunch of TV shows that get a multitude of different podcasts. Ted Lasso, Game of Thrones, The Office, they've all got several podcasts out there analysing all types of different things. But there's not many out there for the little guy, and that's what I'm trying to highlight. So each week I will go through a different show, different seasons, different episodes, and I will go across all different kinds of genres and different countries to bring you what I believe is some of the best TV out there. So I'm glad you're here with me. I'm glad you're here for this journey. And if you've watched the shows before and you wanted to come here and get an analysis on them and have someone go through them and pick out bits that you might have enjoyed, then I'm glad you are here. If, however, you have never watched the show and you just want to come and have someone talk in your ear about different TV shows, I'm glad you are here. But I hope that it inspires some people to go and seek out these TV shows. They deserve to be watched. They were made with love and care, and they are the same as this podcast, made with love and care. I am your host, Mike, and I will take you through every adventure, every horror, every piece of drama, and I hope that you enjoy the show. Hello there, and welcome back to this A Million Little TV Shows podcast. This is now episode 13 of season 13, and, well, I think it's kind of apt that we are going through season 13 when I'm looking at a TV show that basically talks about the end of the world, essentially, or at least the disaster that could potentially be the end of the world. So, since it's episode 13 as well, I might as well carry on and clear the rest of this up. So, as always, we'll be breaking this down episode by episode as we go into the second half of Extrapolations. Now, if you've listened to the first part of the podcast, and if you haven't, please go back and listen. It's episode 11 of season 13. You'll know that I came into this series completely fresh. I hadn't seen a single episode before I even started this journey. And honestly, that's been part of the fun and sometimes the devastation, because every episode has surprised me in a different way, especially the one with the whales. Again, if you haven't listened, please go back 2 episodes. But what initially drew me into Extrapolations wasn't the incredible cast, as good as it is, or the fact that it's an anthology series, which you know I love. It's the subject matter. Climate change is one of the defining issues of our time, and I was so curious to see how a television series would tackle something so complex without simply becoming a lecture. And especially coming from a company like Apple. I mean, the CEO of Apple was stood behind Donald Trump at his inauguration. And you wouldn't think that someone who was backing the president would have made a show like this. But that's by the by, because so far this show has been really impressive by how it approaches the topic from so many different angles. It's not just about rising temperatures or natural disasters, it's about politics, science, faith, family, technology, business, and the emotional toll of living in a changing world. Every episode has asked a different question, and very few of them have actually had simple answers. So, as we move into the next 4 episodes, I'm expecting the stakes to get higher. The timeline keeps moving further into the future, which means we'll be seeing the long-term consequences of the decisions and the indecisions that we've been watching so far. Will humanity finally find solutions? Will technology come to the rescue, or will people simply continue to adapt to a world that is changing faster than they can keep up? Whatever happens, one thing I've learnt already is that Extrapolations isn't interested in predicting the future with absolute certainty. It's interested in starting conversations about the choices we're making today and what kind of future that is going to build. So, let's get into this. This is Extrapolations, the mini-series, episodes 5 to 8. Episode 5, 2059, Nightbirds, Part 2. And so this episode probably takes the biggest tonal shift we've seen so far in Extrapolations, and I mean, that's some way to go. After 4 episodes looking at politicians, scientists, CEOs, and religious leaders, the show drops us into the streets of Mumbai and tells what is essentially a road thriller. At first, it almost feels like we're watching a completely different series. There's action, shootouts, smugglers, and criminals on the run. But don't let that fool you. Underneath all the suspense of the show's clearest message yet, when resources become scarce, survival itself becomes the world's most valuable commodity. So, the episode opens in the Arctic, at a global seed vault, and a woman seems to steal some valuable seeds before escaping into the freezing waters, immediately telling us these aren't ordinary crops. They're priceless genetic resources. The sequence is tense, but it also establishes something important. In the future, seeds are worth risking your life for. Food security has become one of humanity's greatest challenges. Imagine a world where seeds become more valuable than gold. That's exactly where Extrapolations begins this story. Now, where does this stand in the real world? Well, in Salvard, there is a global seed vault, which was created to preserve crop diversity in case of disasters, wars, climate change, for instance. It exists because scientists recognize that protecting genetic diversity may be essential for feeding future generations. And then we head back to Mumbai. Now, we went to Mumbai at the end of the last episode, but immediately we realized that the city is transformed by extreme heat. People aren't allowed outside during the daylight because temperatures and humidity regularly reach deadly levels. Life begins only after sunset. Oxygen is sold on the streets. Everyone coughs. The air is thick with pollution. The world feels hostile before anyone even says a word. One of the first things that Gaurav does is pay for a few breaths from a public oxygen station. That image alone says everything about the future. It feels dystopian. The climate crisis isn't just changing landscapes, it's changing daily routines. Even something as simple as going outside has now become more dangerous. And so, who is Gaurav? He is our main character in this episode. He's a delivery driver who survives by transporting whatever job comes his way. He's not a hero, he's not a revolutionary. He's simply trying to make enough money to survive. That's one of the episode's strengths. For once, we're seeing climate change from the perspective of ordinary working people, rather than those making global decisions. While waiting for his next assignment, Gaurav witnesses the explosion in the sky. And that is the destruction of Geeta Mishra's aircraft from episode 4. And that's where the episode links in. So we know we're in exactly the same timeline that we just left. Gaurav is paired with Neil, an amputee who is calm, capable, and far more dangerous than he first appears. Their mission sounds straightforward. Transport mysterious cargo across India. No questions asked, and naturally nothing goes according to plan. At first, the two men barely trust each other, but as the journey continues, an unexpected friendship develops. The show constantly reminds us that survival creates unlikely alliances. So what is this cargo? As the journey unfolds, we discover that they're transporting 2 incredibly valuable things: an elderly scientist and a rare, drought-resistant seed. Neither is important because of money, they're important because they represent humanity's future. Knowledge and biodiversity have become the most valuable resources left. In earlier episodes, corporations fought over technology. Now people are fighting over food. That progression feels intentional. Now, one of the most frightening moments from this episode is during a wet bulb heat event. Now, I have no clue what that is, but I managed to do a little bit of research, and a wet bulb temperatures combine heat and humidity. When they become too high, the body can no longer cool itself through sweating, which sounds horrendous. Scientists have warned that climate change is making dangerous wet bulb events more frequent, particularly in South Asia and parts of the Middle East. Some have already been recorded during recent extreme heat waves. So this is obviously something that is a major thing that's currently happening in the world. But it seems like in India, in Mumbai, at this particular point in time, 2059, these things are prevalent. These things are like day-to-day things. But during this wet bulb heat event, we see a child caught outside. Neil, remember, an amputee, he's lost one of his legs, risks his own life by leaving the vehicle to save him. Even with protective equipment, the heat causes severe injury. It's a reminder that in this world, the environment itself has become deadly. You don't need a hurricane, you don't need an earthquake. In this case, just the air alone can kill you. After saving this child, the pair continue north, but agencies are now working to recover this cargo, and they are closing in. Once they get to the village of this child and hand it over, these agencies arrive. Shootouts erupt, vehicles are abandoned, routes change constantly. Despite all the action, the episode never forgets its themes. Everyone wants the scientist, everyone wants these seeds. Not because they're weapons, but because they're hope. The future belongs to whoever controls food production. Eventually, their pursuers catch up to them. During the confrontation, Neil ends up being killed. His death is sudden and it's deeply affecting. For much of the episode, he seemed almost indestructible. He was the one who went and sacrificed himself for this child. He gets around on one leg, as well as some people get around on two. But instead, he is the one that dies protecting the mission rather than himself. It's a reminder that even in desperate times, people choose to sacrifice for others. But despite everything, Gaurav manages to complete this mission. The scientist reaches his safety, the seeds are delivered. Before leaving, Gaurav gives some of the seeds to the family who saved Neil's life after he got the heat exposure trying to save their child. But then we see something that feels like it hasn't happened in years, maybe even decades. Rain begins to fall. For the first time all episode, there is a sense of hope, whether it's a result of the geoengineering project from episode 4 or simply coincidence. The timing feels symbolic. It feels like hope has arrived, even if it's done so quietly. Episode 6, 2026, Lola. Now, this episode takes us in a direction that I wasn't expecting at all. On the surface, it seems less about climate change and more like an episode of Black Mirror. It's about memory, artificial intelligence, data storage, and what makes us who we are. But underneath all of that is a climate story that has been quietly building since episode 2. This is a world where environmental collapse hasn't just changed our planet, it has changed our relationship with the past. So we start in 2026, obviously, as the title suggests. And as I'm recording this, I don't know if England have won the World Cup, so if they haven't, then, well, it could be 2026 by the time that they do, which would be 100 years since they last won it. But anyway, we're introduced to a man named Ezra Haddad, and we've met Ezra before. Ezra is the child who was conceived in the first episode where the man rushed away from a global conference to go and be at his wife's bedside. In episode 2, he was the child of the woman who was talking to the whales. So he's now back, and he is at this point currently living in London. He is now an adult, obviously, and one thing we found out about him is he had a heart condition. Now medical advances have managed to cure that heart condition, but he's developed a form of vascular dementia that slowly erases his autobiographical memories. So to fight this, Ezra relies on a service called Cache Cloud, where memories can be digitally stored and replayed. Immediately, this episode asks a fascinating question. If your memories exist on a server, where does your identity actually live? But also, are we simply the sum of our memories, or are we something more? Memories tend to shape the person that we are, and so with them being hooked up to a cloud with you having none of it, really, unless you have access to this cloud, what does that make us? Ezra's job, he is a artificial companion. Using advanced augmented reality technologies and stored memories, he temporarily becomes someone else for the clients who need emotional support. Sometimes he's a father, sometimes he's a husband, sometimes a lost love. He's essentially renting out empathy. It's a strange concept, but one that feels surprisingly believable. People don't just want conversation, they want connection. For instance, things like OnlyFans. That has come about in recent years, and there's many people that use it, and some of those are just for the connection that it brings other people. They are literally paying for people to talk to. And it's a sad reality. I mean, we talk about a men's loneliness epidemic, and it's because of things like that. They feel that they can't communicate with people in the real world, and therefore the digital world is much easier for them to use. So what of Ezra and this job? What does it do? Well, one of his regular clients is a woman named Natasha, a single mother raising a daughter. This little girl hires Ezra to play the role of her father. At first it seems uncomfortable, but as the session continues, genuine affection develops between all three of them. For a brief moment, Ezra experiences something close to the family that he lost. It's bittersweet because everyone involved isn't real, yet emotionally it almost is. So one thing that you've got to ask is, again, we can go back to my OnlyFans theory. Can a relationship still be meaningful if everyone knows that it's temporary? I mean, you go onto these sites, I assume, and you speak to people and they speak back to you. Do you get to know the true person? Or is it just a game for them? Are they just there to get the money? But as you heard, I did say that he'd had a previous relationship. And so, who was that? As we go through the story, we see Ezra's desperate attempt to preserve his memories of his late wife Lola. These memories are everything to him. They're his connection to the happiest period of his life. But storage memory isn't free. And this is something that has been explored in Black Mirror in a couple of episodes. And the way that this story goes and the way that the world is right now, I feel like this is like just on the doorstep. Because, like I've said, the memory isn't free. Cash clouds come with a subscription fee. And like all subscription fees, they keep increasing. As time goes on, the impact of the devastation of the world keeps increasing these prices. So soon Ezra can no longer afford to preserve everything. The most personal parts of his life have become a monthly bill. And that's a terrifying concept. Again, I've said it before, but I'm going to go back to the Black Mirror episode where there is basically, as the packages change to a different package, you get the diamond package or the platinum package or whatever it is, you get ads on those certain packages. And as soon as that range, that different package is no longer viable for the company, they will start putting adverts on them. And so instead of having a normal life, you get plagued with these ads all the time. And this is very similar. So this is where this episode really becomes heartbreaking because Ezra is forced to decide which memories deserve to survive. His childhood, his grandmother, seeing the whale in episode 2, or indeed Lola. Every decision feels impossible. How do you rank your life? Like, if someone was to tell you tomorrow that you had to start deleting memories that you had, core memories, go back to that term from Inside Out, which is one of the best films of all time, but go back to that. What do you delete? What do you get rid of? Okay, you can get rid of some of the trauma that made you who you are, but then does that change who you are? It's the thing that got you through most of it, so does that ultimately change who you eventually are going to become? But then everything else that has shaped your life, relationships, friendships, loves, loss, it is all going to be going away some point. And so how do you decide which version of yourself deserves to continue existing? Memory isn't just about nostalgia, it's identity. Like I've said, without memories, who are we? And this episode really does identify something quite interesting. It quietly criticises something very familiar to us, corporate dependence. In earlier episodes, companies controlled the climate and the technology around it. Now they control memory itself. How many of us are sat scrolling away and lose a couple of hours? It's mind-boggling, but it happens. And it's these companies basically putting stuff into your brains. But back to Ezra, he doesn't lose memories because of his disease alone. He loses them because he can't afford the subscriptions. That feels frighteningly close to today's world. Again, we've got so many streaming services, cloud storage, digital ownership. Everything has a recurring payment. Now imagine if your memories depended on it. I mean, in my other job, I work with a CAD package that now is subscription. Before, things like Microsoft Office were a program you would buy once and you would use it until the end of days, really. You wouldn't generally fork out for the new package. Now, you have to, because it's all subscription based. You can't just buy a one-off license and have that be it. And so now we see that Ezra is desperate. He wants to save Lola's memories. And he turns to, well, where some people do turn to in this kind of situation. He goes to the black market. Someone promises cheaper storage, and instead he loses almost everything. The digital files disappear, years of his life vanish in an instant. It's devastating because the theft isn't physical, it's emotional. You can replace money, can't replace lived experience. And so by the end of the episode, Ezra makes peace with something he has spent the entire story resisting. He cannot preserve everything. Instead of endlessly chasing memories, he begins embracing the life still in front of him. His relationship with Natasha and her daughter becomes something real. Not because they replace Lola, but because they remind him that new memories still matter. And so far, it's been one of the most hopeful endings of the season. But also, when you think about it on the surface, it's a form of dementia that this guy's got. And so, yeah, okay, he's got to the point where he is happy with his lot in life, but is he still the same person? Episode 7, 2068, The Going Away Party. So, we've made it to the penultimate episode of Extrapolations, and once again the series completely changes direction. Again, no governments, no whales, no geoengineering this time. This time, it's something perhaps even more unsettling. What happens when the richest people on Earth decide they've had enough? So far in the last 2 episodes, it feels like we've dealt with the poorest members of society and then sort of the middle class. Now, we're seeing what happens when people with money want to get away from this planet. So, we're set in 2068, and we're exploring a future where technology offers humanity an escape, not by fixing the planet, but by abandoning it altogether. The episode is about privilege and inequality, morality, and whether the ultimate luxury is no longer wealth, but simply having a chance at life. And again, I'll go back to the Black Mirror episodes, and this is very San Bernardino, but it's actually set in San Francisco. So the skyline is barely visible through yellow thick smog. The air is almost permanently polluted. People measure everything in carbon credits. Even throwing a dinner party carries an environmental cost. This isn't the dramatic destruction that we've seen in disaster films. Instead, it's a city that's still functioning, just under enough constant environmental strain. One of the show's recurring ideas is that civilization doesn't necessarily collapse. Sometimes it simply becomes harder, more expensive, and more unequal. So, the first character we meet is Anna. She is a domestic worker struggling to survive. She takes temporary jobs cleaning homes for the wealthy. Immediately, the contrast is obvious. Outside, ordinary people ration resources. Inside, the rich still enjoy extravagant meals and luxurious homes. Climate change hasn't created equality. If anything, it's widened the gap between those with resources and those without. So, one question we've got to ask ourselves is who suffers most during an environmental crisis? Because historically, it's very rarely been the ones with the greatest wealth. I mean, a couple of years ago, a few Hollywood stars had their houses burned down, and yes, as devastating as that is, it doesn't really cover the whole gambit, really, does it? Because, yes, a bunch of rich people lost their homes, but a fuck ton more who were poor lost their homes as well. And as much as some Hollywood stars have given back and tried to help out, it doesn't really touch the sides. But tonight, Anna is going to be a caterer, and she arrives at the home of Oggy Bolo and his wife Sylvia. They're hosting an intimate New Year's Eve party with what we believe is close friends, including Nicholas Bilton and his much younger influencer girlfriend, Elodie. At first, everything feels elegant. Guests drinking wine, conversation flowing, the atmosphere is sophisticated, but beneath the surface, everyone seems uneasy. The party isn't simply a celebration, it's hiding something much bigger. And this is where the title of the episode comes in, because Oggy finally reveals why he has invited everyone. He's secured a place in a revolutionary program that allows a person's consciousness to be digitally uploaded into a simulated paradise while Earth slowly recovers. The technology promises something extraordinary: freedom from illness, freedom from pollution, perhaps even a form of immortality. But there's a catch. There's only one place. Suddenly, the dinner party becomes something very different, because throughout history, wealth has brought comfort. Now, it is buying escape, but it's only allowing escape for one person. And this is where the Black Mirror episode San Bernardino comes in. It's about people who are getting old, who are living in homes that want a better life, want to relive their youth, and they get put into a simulation where they live out their fantasies, live out their lives, their loves, and have their last days, weeks, months, whatever it is, in a world where they can just be themselves again. Now, each guest responds differently. Some are fascinated, some are skeptical, some openly question whether a digital consciousness is still truly alive. Is uploading your mind actually survival, or is it simply a sophisticated form of death? The episode doesn't answer. Instead, it allows the conversation to unfold naturally. If a perfect digital copy of you exists, is that still you, or merely someone who remembers being you? What's the technology at the other end, I suppose, is the other question. What happens when you come out of this stasis? Do you get put back in your old body, which is still an old body, or is that now gone? Do you get put in a new, fresh body? And how fresh? And where from? As the evening progresses, hidden resentments emerge. Old friendships begin to fracture. Self-interest replaces politeness. Everyone suddenly imagines themselves as the person who deserves the opportunity. This episode cleverly shows how scarcity changes behaviours. Earlier episodes explored water shortages, food and biodiversity. Now scarcity has become essential. There simply isn't enough places for everyone. Throughout the evening, Anne is simply in the background. At first she feels like the main character, but as the evening goes on, it plays out between the four main players, and Anne just quietly observes. She isn't part of the conversation, but she's perhaps the episode's most important character. She represents everyone excluded from these extraordinary technological advances. I imagine the audience that are listening to this, most of them will be in that boat of where Anne is. I know I certainly am. I wouldn't be the one hosting these parties. I wouldn't be the one with the option of getting in some capsule and being safe for the rest of my life. I'd be in the trenches. So while the wealthy debate philosophical questions about digital immortality, Anne is simply trying to survive another day. The contrast could not be clearer. Technology often arrives first for those who can afford it. The climate crisis risks widening those inequalities even further. Not to pick on him so much, I mean, he deserves it, but Elon Musk wants to blast us off into space. Jeff Bezos has recently done such a thing. Yes, okay, they came back. Donald Trump has just built a bomb shelter under the White House. As much as he's claiming it's a ballroom, it's a bag of bullshit. So we can see the inequalities already in our own system. How is that going to be in 42 years when this is playing out? That's in front of us right now, if it ever gets that far. But as the evening goes on and we see this tussle for who is going to be next into this pod or this new reality, the evening begins to spiral. Oggy ends up dying unexpectedly before he can claim his place, and chaos ensues. Questions arise over who should inherit the opportunity, and in a surprising twist, Anna assumes Oggy's identity and boards the transport heading towards the upload facility. It's an ending that's equal parts hopeful and morally ambiguous. Has justice been served, or has another deception begun? The episode deliberately leaves this question open. But what I've found with this episode, apart from the most disturbing scene possible with Tobey Maguire and Marion Cotillard, was the masturbation scene. Now, Sylvia doesn't like being touched anymore. Nicholas has always fancied her, and these two try to engage in some activity. However, she doesn't want to be touched, and therefore watching Spider-Man, as he will always be known to me, playing with himself was a little bit odd. But the episode of all still offers a very philosophical end. If you had that opportunity to take Oggy's place, would you? And once everything's gone from this earth that you no longer have, everyone you loved, everyone is now gone, what do you do? It's interesting to think. Episode 8, 2070, Ecocide. So, we've reached the final episode of Extrapolations, and after travelling through more than 3 decades of imagined history, the series ends not with another climate disaster, but instead with a courtroom. And at first this seems like a pretty odd choice to make for a finale, Because after all, we've seen flooded cities, dying oceans, disappearing wildlife, geoengineering projects, and extraordinary technological advances. But when you really think about it, this ending makes perfect sense. The biggest question the series has been asking us all along isn't can we stop climate change, but who takes responsibility when we don't? And this is where the episode attempts to answer that question. So, we're in 2070, 44 years from now. The climate crisis has fundamentally reshaped civilization. Some progress has been made, geoengineering has slowed further warming, communities have adapted, technology has evolved dramatically, but humanity is living in a permanently altered world. Nothing returns to the way it was. The series makes an important point. Some consequences just simply cannot be undone. Climate change isn't presented as a problem with a finish line. It's something future generations will continue managing long after today's decisions. And so we go back to a character we've met before, Nicholas Bilton, and he ends up being the central figure in all this. He is much older, quieter, far more reflective than the ambitious technology CEO we met in 2037. His influence has shaped much of the world we've watched throughout the season. Now he's forced to confront that legacy. The audience has spent 8 episodes watching history unfold. Nicholas now has to answer for it. Success and responsibility often arrive together. The question is whether people are willing to accept both. So an international tribunal hears a landmark case charging Nicholas with ecocide. The accusation isn't that he personally caused climate change. Instead, prosecutors argue that corporate decisions, delayed actions, and prioritization of profit contributed to the widespread environmental destruction. The courtroom quickly becomes a debate about history itself. Could things have been different, or was this future inevitable? The episode challenges the idea that responsibility belongs to people who directly commit harmful acts. Sometimes enabling harm carries consequences too. So what have we seen throughout this season? Well, witnesses and evidence bring back moments that we've seen. Climate negotiations, corporate lobbying, scientific breakthroughs, geoengineering, food shortages, climate migration, even every story we've followed suddenly becomes evidence. It's a clever storytelling device. The anthology no longer feels like separate episodes. Everything has been building towards this moment. It feels a little bit like the end of Modern Love, when all the characters seen in that final scene linked together. They're all in the same city. They're all either going to dates or being around the person that they love or want to be with. And whereas that is quite a sweet moment, this is quite harrowing. History isn't a collection of isolated events. It's a chain of decisions. So Nicholas doesn't deny climate crisis. Instead, he argues that his companies developed technologies that ultimately helped humanity survive. Artificial intelligence improved forecasting. Innovation accelerated adaptation. Scientific advances bought valuable time. He asks a difficult question. Can someone who contributed to a problem and helped solve it be judged only by their mistakes? It's one of the episode's strongest moral dilemmas. The prosecution focuses less on technology and more on people. Communities have been destroyed, species have lost forever, families displaced, and cultures erased. Again, the show avoids turning climate change into abstract numbers. Every statistic represents real lives. The emotional testimony becomes more powerful than any scientific graph. Climate change isn't measured in degrees Celsius. It's measured in homes, memories, communities, and opportunities that disappeared forever. So, what is the meaning of ecocide? And why the term matters so much? It's about recognizing that destroying ecosystems isn't simply unfortunate. It's a moral weight, a legal one, and certainly an historical one. Whether Nicholas is found personally responsible almost becomes secondary. The larger issue is that humanity has finally created a language for recognizing environmental destruction as something worthy of accountability. So what do we end up concluding out of all of this? We've got a man on trial for his company's involvement in ecocide. Well, when the tribunal reaches its verdict, the moment feels less like a punishment and more like reflection. The ruling doesn't reverse rising seas, it doesn't resurrect extinct species, it doesn't erase suffering. but it establishes something important. Future generations will no longer be able to treat environmental destruction as an unavoidable side effect of progress. It becomes something societies choose to remember and to judge. Now, in today's world, we're looking at companies that damage the seas, damage the air, damage the land. I mean, we're talking now about these data centers and how it's going to cause untold amount of blackouts and issues with local areas because they are trying to keep the heat down in these things, and therefore people are going to have to suffer to keep the data centers open. And this is a massive worry right now. The billionaires are obviously on the side of themselves and they want to build these things wherever, and they're saying it is a good economic advantage for the area that they're going into. Maybe 300 jobs could come out of it, but what's the toll on the actual area? Fracking is another one, because we are becoming so irresponsible with how we are doing these massive things when it's causing earthquakes and problems with tectonic plates. And I mean, I'm not a geoscientist, but Jesus Christ, like, it's pretty fucking scary what's going on. And instead of standing up to these people, governments aren't doing anything. They're allowing them and their money to sway lobbies and get things over the line so they can just ultimately become richer. And all it's doing is harming the earth. And for the 99.999% of us, we only have one earth. It's the minimal 1% that can fuck off to wherever. So what do we see in the end? The closing scene, it looks towards the future. Children continue growing, nature shows signs of resilience, communities rebuild, humanity moves forward, but the ending isn't entirely optimistic, but nor is it hopeless. Instead, it feels very realistic. The future remains uncertain, but uncertainty also means possibility. The final message isn't that humanity failed, it's that humanity still has a choice. And right now, I'd prefer it if we had that choice in front of us to go forward now. Instead, what seems to be happening is we're waiting. Obviously, there's massive government changes that need to happen, and with certain people involved, that's not going to happen anytime soon. But things need to start moving forward so that we don't get to 2070 before anything starts even being implemented. People need to be held accountable now, not in 40 years' time, because a lot of the people that are doing the damage won't be here. So, these have been fairly longer episodes than what I usually do, but I think it was worth it. But that is it. We've reached the end of Extrapolations, and looking back over these final 4 episodes, I think it's fair to say that the series became much more than I expected when I first hit play. The first half of the season asked us about climate change through politics, science, religion, biodiversity. But the second half switched focus to say something more personal. We explored survival, grief, inequality, memory, justice, and legacy. The climate was always there, but it was never the whole story. Instead, it became the backdrop against which every human emotion and every difficult decision played out. I will say that the second half of this season was a lot more palatable than the first half. I ended up watching the first half in very small blocks and kind of edited together as I went, whereas this one I watched the whole way through and managed to get this whole episode recorded. I think that the first half is because we're seeing a lot of what is happening right now in that first episode, or in those first 4 episodes, whereas this one, finding people who are accountable, having a lot of AI generated technologies that, yes, you can see the road that they're going down, but it's still that kind of Black Mirror future at the minute. It's still dystopian for us. Whereas the first half was a real, this is happening now. What I found most interesting was that Extrapolations never tried to scare us with one giant apocalyptic event. There are no asteroid-style endings or sudden collapses of civilization. Instead, the show imagines a future built from thousands of small decisions. Some good, some bad, many delayed. That's probably what makes it feel so believable. The future doesn't arrive all at once. It arrives one policy, one invention, one compromise, and one missed opportunity at a time. The anthology format works for me as it has done in many other series that I watched, and at first I wasn't sure how the 8 stories largely would come together. I'd seen the cast and I'd seen that there'd been reoccurring characters, but by the end I realised they weren't really separate at all. Every episode was just another piece of the puzzle. Politicians, scientists, billionaires, rabbis, delivery drivers, marine biologists, children, workers, and the ordinary families all began to be part of the same conversation. Climate change wasn't shown as one problem or one solution. It was shown as something that touches every aspect of life. One thing I really appreciated was that the series refused to deal with absolutes. It didn't tell us that technology would be able to save us. It didn't dismiss it either. It didn't blame a single person or present one hero. Instead, it acknowledged that the climate crisis is incredibly complicated, and that made the stories feel more honest. Almost every character believed they were doing the right thing, even when the consequences turned out very differently. So if there's one message that stayed with me throughout the season, it's that climate change isn't really a story about the environment. It's about people. It's about the choices we make, the priorities we set, and the legacy we want to leave behind. Rising temperatures and disappearing species and, changing coastlines matter because they affect lives, families, and communities. The series constantly reminds us that behind every statistic is a human story. Watching the show for the first time has also made me realise how good science fiction can be when it's grounded in reality. The best science fiction doesn't predict the future perfectly. It uses the future to help us understand the present. That's exactly what this series does. Every episode asks us to think about conversations we're already having today, whether it's renewable energy, AI, food, security, migration, biodiversity loss, or environmental justice. Now, I've said it plenty of times throughout the show, but this last 4 episodes especially felt like episodes of Black Mirror, which is a series that I love to death and is one of those shows that I can watch over and over again. But it asks similar questions. It makes you think, and it makes you want to adapt to what is going on today. But I think every episode landed for me, but maybe not equally. So like any anthology series out there were more stories I connected with than others. Whalefall was one of the best episodes, because for me at least it had the emotional power. So being able to talk to animals is obviously science fiction, but what if we could? But also, what would we say? I covered it in that episode. What would we say to them? What would we say to an intelligent being that is asking us questions about an environment that it doesn't understand? How would we explain money? How would we explain a billionaire that can hoard as much money as possible and never give back to his own community, but also damage other communities, damage other species? But the episode Face of God raised fascinating ethical questions about geoengineering, something I'd never really heard of before. But it was a very interesting episode, and if that's something that can happen, I mean, it's insane to think about, but the way the world is right now, we kind of need something drastically. But the quieter, more personal episodes surprised me the most, proving that climate change doesn't always need to be spectacular disasters to make an impact. Sometimes the most powerful moments are simply people trying to hold on to hope in an uncertain world. So this show has been thoughtful and ambitious, and unlike almost anything else on TV, it occasionally asks a little too much of its audience, and some episodes are stronger than others. But I admire how willing it is to tackle difficult questions without pretending to have easy answers. And maybe that's the biggest lesson of all. The show isn't trying to tell us all what the future will look like. It's reminding us that the future is still being written. The choices we make today about energy, technology, conservation, politics, and even how we treat one another will shape the world that future generations inherit. Whether that future looks anything like the one in the series is ultimately up to us. But as always, we can only keep living day to day and find out what that future is. Now, I am done for today. However, as always, and I forgot to do it in the last episode, so I apologise for that. But I'm going to tell you now what we're going to be covering next season. So, we're going to continue our coverage of Bates Motel Season 3. Physical Season 2 is also on the docket. we're then going into a show called Love, Death and Robots, which is a cute little show, animated show, and it's very similar lines to what we've been watching, and I just enjoyed it when I watched it. Then we are coming up with a horror, The Haunting of Hill House, which blew my goddamn mind when I watched it the first time, and I know that a lot of people out there loved it. However, I'm going to be wearing headphones while I watch it, so it's going to freak me the fuck out. But thankfully, while I'm watching that, I will be watching a show called Brassic as well, which is a British comedy and very enjoyable, very fun, very silly. And that is what I'm going to be covering next season. But for today, I am done. By the looks of it, this is going to be the longest episode in a while, so I apologise for that, but I'm done. So thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you enjoyed the show. But until next time, I will speak to you soon. Bye. As always, thank you for listening to this podcast, and you could really help me and the podcast by giving a like, share, subscribe on all major platforms that you listen to podcasts on. As an independent podcaster, this will just help me exponentially when it comes to actually doing more things with this podcast. I truly do enjoy this, and I absolutely love revisiting these TV shows with you guys. So any engagement from you is always welcome, and I will try and listen to all of you when you give suggestions or just tell me what you think about the podcast. But once again, thank you for listening, and until next time, I will speak to you soon. Bye.